So I've now watched the entire first season of Couple to Throuple, and I have some feedback for the producers. Some of this feedback is going to be just my general thoughts on the show and the format, and comparing that to how polyamory looks in real life, and some of it are changes I would like to see in the second season if there is going to be one. Some of these changes are probably going to be more realistic to implement than others because, at the end of the day, reality dating shows are meant to be somewhat unrealistic and, to have some toxic elements to create drama. If you look at your bang average monogamous dating show, you would not say that's representative of monogamy. And so I understand that, for a show like Couple to Throuple, it's not the polyamorous representation we wanted, but it was never going to be the polyamorous representation we wanted. So I have a couple of notes that I've put in this notebook on kind of some loose sheets of paper that I scribbled on while I was watching the show. And I'm just gonna go through them, hopefully in a somewhat coherent order, and kind of let you know what I think and what I think could be changed. Not just for more ethics, but also genuinely because I think it would be entertaining. So like I said in my previous review, Couple to Throuple is extremely couple-centric. How could it not be, right? And as much as I hate that we have yet another polyamorous show that is just focused on triads when triads make up, a very small percentage of the polyamorous community, I feel like there are a couple of things they could have done that still could have kept the couple-centric model without massively fucking over everyone else. So the first piece of feedback that I would give to the producers is that the role of the thirds needs to be much clearer. I'm personally not a fan of unicorn hunting, but no matter what I say, there are going to be couples who are going to be unicorn hunting, and there are going to be unicorns who want to be hunted. People like that exist. Honestly, the bigger ethical issue is when expectations aren't clearly communicated and the parties aren't on the same page. If you're a third coming in and you're like, I just want to be a fun, good time, I want to facilitate a pleasurable experience for a couple, I want to be the guest star in the bedroom, I'm here for a good time, not a long time, right? Then great, talk about that. And if you're on the same page, awesome. I've been that person for couples and it can be a good time. But I think the issue with Couple to Throuple is that a lot of the couples went in thinking that this would be an experiment, right? They could try out different flavors and mess around a little bit with different thirds because ultimately it was about opening their relationship and about their experience of polyamory and learning and growing. And I feel like a lot of the thirds came in with different expectations of what they were in for. Some of them, I think they understood the assignment. And some of them, they were like, I'm here looking for love and connection. And, if we're going to be throupled up and spending loads of time together in a room and whatever, then, I'm looking for some kind of commitment. And I'm not going to be wanting you to just run off at the next shiny thing that you see. I think also some of the couples were more sexually oriented than romantically oriented. When there's such a mismatch in expectations, someone's feelings are going to get hurt. And maybe that's the point, right? But there are better ways to do this that can still be entertaining. While I was watching Couple to Throuple, I was thinking about yet another couple-centric non-monogamy show that I watched last year, which was one called Open House on Channel 4 in the UK. That show had a similar-ish format, it was about couples who were exploring non-monogamy for the first time, and there was a market of singles for them to try out. But Open House felt significantly less gross than Couple to Throuple, even though both are reality shows. And I was trying to think about why I felt so differently about those two shows, and I realized it was because the thirds were given a very specific role. Every single person who signed on to become a potential interest of the couples on that show knew exactly what they were going in for. Whereas I feel like the people on Couple to Throuple did not. Couple to Throuple was supposedly about polyamory, but I feel like a lot of the couples were kind of just looking for a sexual experience before they would even think about romance. Whereas in Open House, all of the adventures that the couples had were purely sexual. The unicorns were there to give them a good time, to help them, through their jealousy. And, they were meant to be facilitators, guides, as much as the therapist who was on set and the producers. And, they weren't characters in the same way that the couples were. Whereas in Couple to Throuple, I feel like the thirds who signed on to the show probably didn't know that the couples they were going to meet weren't going to be very experienced in polyamory at all. And that I think a lot of the couples had some experience of sexual non-monogamy, but that's very distinct from having a polyamorous relationship. Scott Evans, who was the coach on the show, has his own YouTube channel, and he actually interviewed Ashmal and Rahman. And I remember Ashmal Rahman in that video saying something like, oh my god, we didn't realize we'd actually have to factor in a whole other person's feelings in this relationship. And I was like, bitch, what did you think you were signing up for? Couple to Throuple. This is not Couple to threesome. Anyway, I just feel like a lot of the thirds went all in emotionally, and a lot of the couples were just trying to, try out new shiny things, and, I think as Mia put it in, like, episode 6 or whatever, to, like, play with them, pick them up, put them down, and, when they're ready to have fun with them again, pick them up again. The thirds were being objectified, and I feel like a lot of them did not sign up to be objectified. And many people forget you can consent to being objectified. The thirds on Open House, 100% were being objectified. But they wanted to be. I feel like Couple to Throuple just had a very confused identity as a core. Like, is this an experiment for the couples and, the thirds are just there to kind of facilitate that experiment? Or are you actually trying to help 3 people grow a relationship? And, like, obviously, reality shows are a weird-ass environment to meet someone, and, it's very different dating someone on, like, an idyllic island in the middle of the fucking Bahamas and, dating them in the real world. I know that. But still, I also think that the lack of alignment and expectations, and again, perhaps this was intentional, led to the couples taking a lot less accountability than they should have, considering they were trying to build a relationship with someone else. With the exception of Corey, Denise, and Wilder, every single time a third brought up to the couple, hey, I'm feeling a bit objectified, I'm feeling dehumanized, I feel like you're just kind of treating me like an object, I don't feel good about this, can you please give me some reassurance, or can we just at least have a conversation about this? The couples always responded negatively. They were always like, how dare you? You knew what you were getting into with us. This is an experiment for us. This is supposed to be about us. So why are you complaining? And then usually that third would end up getting swapped out. And I'm not saying this doesn't also happen on monogamous dating shows, but it just felt extra gross because it was the 2 versus 1 situation. Like, there is a skewed power dynamic here. It is we against I. And, I feel like they didn't do enough to address that. Ultimately, a lot of the couples were very much invested in protecting their relationship at all costs, as is often the case when couples go out into the non-monogamy world without having done much research. Like, I know this is a common phenomenon. It was still aggravating though, because they were just kind of like, okay, you need to fit into our relationship. We're not going to be changing our relationship or kind of, making room for you in it. You have to kind of slot into this very convenient place, and if you do anything that doesn't align with our expectations, we can just swap you out for other people. In a relationship, like with all relationships, there needs to be give and take. But when the third is looking to build a connection between all 3 of you, and the couple are seeing the third as a threat to their relationship, which they're so invested in protecting and not having any conflict in, then you're not on the same page, guys. Like, even something as simple as like the stay or swap ceremony. Like, the couples have had a discussion between them on what they're going to decide. The third might potentially be rejected by 2 people at once. They just don't address this on the show. Apart from a throwaway comment from Ashman Rahman at one point about what a big risk Jonathan is taking, I feel like no one talked about this. No one talked about the big risk that the unicorns were taking on in, like, getting to know 2 new people when, the couples had each other, and they were operating as a team. And, they definitely had the upper hand in the whole situation. Like, this isn't addressed at all. They're just kind of like, oh my god, equality, love, peace. Meanwhile, like, the unicorns were just going through a hell of a time. So all of this is to say, the role of the thirds needed to be clearer. If it's an experiment, let them know it's an experiment. If the couples are inexperienced, let them know that they're experienced so they can, adjust their expectations accordingly. If the couple are just kind of coming in for, like, a good fun time, tell the unicorns that, and those who want to sign up to that will do that. The second bit of feedback that I would give is that I think there need to be more exercises that help the couples sit in discomfort. I feel like every single time something difficult happened on the show or something that, like, threatened their relationship, they were much more likely to just kind of swap the person out. And I thought it was especially fucked that even though the couples were the least experienced ones, in the whole thing, they were also the ones with more power. So the thirds who actually knew what the fuck was going on and, had probably experienced this before and just, probably had their shit together more, were forced to capitulate to these couples' demands, make apologies when it was definitely the couple's fault, and just kind of do various other things that were grossly unfair, while the couples just continued to sit in their ignorance. Opening your relationship to a third person is a fundamentally vulnerable experience. You cannot do that without having some uncomfortable feelings that you need to sit with and work through. But I feel like a lot of the couples were not being encouraged to do that. They were just like, oh, threat, whoop, there you go. Like, I genuinely laughed out loud in, like, the second batch of episodes, like, in episodes 4 to 6, where they did that, like, love triangle exercise where, like, the couple would stand in the middle, and then, like, you know, they'd pick, like, 3 different thirds to answer questions, and if they were compatible, they'd step, like, closer to the like, it was literally, like, you know, couple centrism, the game. Like, it was so incredibly ludicrous. Like, these couples just being like, you know, answer the right questions, and if you're compatible with us, we'll reward you with our love. And, you know, the thirds were just kind of like, shit, am I picking the right answer? And they were very much pressured to not, you know, make authentic decisions, because then they would lose, you know, the incredibly prized affection from this couple who have no idea what the fuck they're doing. I was honestly surprised that any of the singles even stepped forward for any of the couples, because, like, with the exception of Corey and Wilder, they were just all deeply unattractive to me. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of the couples did do some learning and growing over the course of the show, but I feel it was not enough, and a lot of it should have happened more up front. Like, there was, like, a values exercise and, like, you know, an opportunity for, like, the people to ask each other honest questions. And I feel like that should have happened at the start, not, like, when they were already kind of halfway through, like, committing to their throuple. Like, I feel like those who made it through the challenge were just lucky that they happened to be compatible, and not because they'd worked super hard to overcome the challenge. Like, no, they just hadn't had the fucking conversations. Like, they had a therapist on site, they had a coach and everything. I feel like they could have done more exercises for, like, the couples to be vulnerable and, like, interrogate themselves. Talk about, like, what was difficult about opening their relationship, rather than just like, oh, I don't like this person, they're saying some shit that's making me uncomfortable. Feedback number 3. Let people go on one-on-one dates. Like, I feel like all the dates that happened in the show were 3 people together. And in reality, right, like, throuples don't just have threesomes and 3-way dates all the goddamn time. Sometimes someone is busy. Sometimes someone is in the mood for sex. And I feel like there could have been so much more potential for growth and drama, right, because that's what the network wants. If, like, the thirds had been able to go on dates with, like, each individual member of the couple separately, because that's how it works in real life. Instead, what we got was, you know, the couple pick a third, and the third is just thrown headfirst into their relationship. They're suddenly sharing a room, sharing a bed, sharing a bathroom, sharing all their time together, and they never get a break from each other. And I don't mean just, like, as individuals you don't get a break from each other. I mean, like, literally each of the individual connections between the 3 don't get to be away from, you know, whoever's, like, the third person in the situation. Like, I would have loved to see what would have happened if Becca and Lauren had gone on a solo date, and then Becca and Dylan had gone on a solo date, because it was so clear that, like, Becca and Lauren connected so much better than Becca and Dylan. And, you know, what kind of emotional stuff would have come up because of that? What kind of conversations would have happened? Like, throughout the show, they keep reiterating how, you know, the thirds are attracted to each member of the couple in different ways. Like, at one point, Jonathan, I think he says, like, I'm much more physically attracted to Rahman, but more emotionally attracted to Ashmal. And I'm like, well, okay, but, you know, you need to kind of spend more time with them individually to kind of figure that out. Like, at the end of the day, sexual connection is a lot easier to do in a group context than emotional connection. Like, if you want to, like, connect deeply with someone, at the end of the day, you kind of want to spend some intimate time with them without kind of someone else also being there. Like, you know, the boundaries exercise they did in the first 3 episodes where, like, one of them had to watch their partner be kissed by the third, or, like, do shit with the third. I get where they were coming from with that exercise, but it also felt somewhat voyeuristic in nature, and I feel like there could have been so much more potential for drama if, like, you know, the affection had happened, you know, off screen, or, like, you know, in separate rooms, and say, like, you know, Ashmal and Jonathan were going on a date, and Rahman was, like, alone in his room, and, you know, kind of what would his emotional state be like? What would he be thinking about? What would he be imagining them doing? What was the reality of what was going on? You know, I feel like that could have been really interesting, and does reflect the reality of polyamory. Like when you're at home and your partner's on a date with someone else, or you're both on different dates in the same night. Like, that is a thing that happens, and is something that you kind of have to get used to, because you're not going to be spending all of your time together all the time. And in line with, you know, going on one-on-one dates, why weren't the unicorns allowed to date multiple couples? Like, if the couples were allowed to explore with multiple singles and swap them out and whatever, why couldn't the singles do that? That was what really just befuddled me for the whole thing. Like, it was ultimately a polyamory show with a very monogamous format because, yeah, like, the couples could only date one unicorn at a time, which necessarily meant that, like, the unicorns would feel discarded if they had interest in someone else. And meanwhile, the unicorns had a very high-risk situation where they would commit to a couple who had wandering eyes. And there were various conversations that, like, you know, various throuples had on the show, right? Like, Darian talked about how she was interested in Max and Ash while she was in a throuple with Brittany and Sean, and they got really, you know, threatened by that. But Brittany and Sean were also like, oh, you know, we might be interested in Peach or Sanu or whatever, and Darian was just like, what the fuck? Like, just double standards all round. And honestly, the solos should be allowed to date each other. Like, the little bit with, like, Sanu and Becca and, you know, like, them, like, making out in the pool, that was fucking hot. That was great. I loved that. And here I'm gonna draw another comparison to Open House, because on Open House, it was very much the vibe of, like, you know, all the singles, like, knew each other, they got along, and they were very much, like, to the couples, like, welcome to our world. Whereas I feel like Couple to Throuple was a divide and conquer situation where they were like, we pick you and you're ours now, and you can't go back to them, which is, again, a monogamous format. Like, the world of polyamory is one of, like, community and connection and, like, you know, having variety and whatever. So I just feel like it was incredibly myopic that, you know, like, the singles were just kind of, like, absorbed into the throuple and then they weren't allowed to explore outside of that, particularly given the existing power dynamics and the risks that they were taking on as it was. Another benefit of just letting people go on solo dates, like, even if you don't do the solo should date each other thing, like, if they just made the change of, like, letting the singles go on dates with each individual member of the couple separately, that would have served as a great emotional exercise. They were setting up all these challenges for the couples, and I feel like none of that would have compared to having to sit with the discomfort of your partner leaving you alone at home to go out on a date with someone that you're also interested in. And also, it really would put the focus on emotional connections, not just physical ones. Like, the reason why, like, so many people are now ragging on Mia on social media for not putting out is because polyamory is still, like, very kind of tied to sex for a lot of people, very much tied to threesomes. It's very much like, oh, like a couple plus someone who's, like, having fun with them. No, it's about emotional connection with multiple people. And I feel like if they had been allowed to date separately, like, mainstream audiences would be able to see that more. Feedback number 4. And I feel like this, of all the things I'm going to suggest, is probably the most realistic change that the producers could actually make to the series. Give the singles their own fucking rooms. I don't mean all the singles who are available for the couples to choose from. I mean the singles that the couples actually end up picking. Give them a space to retreat to if there's conflict between the couple, you know, a space to have a date with, like, one member of the couple, you know, separately, or even, like, if you don't want to give each unicorn their own separate room, have, like, a communal space with a bunch of bunk beds where all the unicorns can, like, gather and chat about how things are going with their respective couples. Like, I really wanted to see more conversations between the thirds. Like, the little bits of snapshots that we got of Becca and Jonathan talking about, like, the conflict going on in their respective throuples was fascinating. I would have loved to see more of that. And, like, a communal space for multiple people to sleep in isn't, like, a unique thing on reality shows. Like, you see it on, like, The Ultimatum, on Too Hot to Handle, like, you know, there are loads of reality shows who already do this. So, you know, once the singles have been picked, why don't they have their own space, like a unicorn-only space for them to, like, chat to each other? There's so much potential for drama and entertainment there. And also, you know, when things are going badly in a throuple relationship, like, there were so many instances where I just felt really bad for, like, Sanu and Jonathan, as, like, their respective couples were just, like, arguing and they were just kind of lying there in bed. Like, that's fucking awkward. And they have to stay with them for, like, a couple more days until the next day of swap ceremony. That's fucked. And they have nowhere else to retreat to? Like, I was already talking about, like, the power dynamics and, like, the risks involved and stuff like that. But, you know, that just feels unsafe to me. I think the only person who was able to get some space from their couple was Becca, and I think maybe she just went to the Eden suite or something like that. Was that the only room available in the whole fucking villa that the singles could have gone to? Anyway, if NBC changes absolutely nothing else, give the solos their own rooms. I'm begging you. It would actually serve the show in terms of producing more entertainment and drama. And it would also be safer for the thirds who are already at risk in that situation as it is. Feedback number 5. Let each individual member of the couple speak for themselves a little bit more. I feel like every single time a couple was on screen to, like, declare a decision that they'd made or whatever, they'd already previously spoken about it and, you know, one of them was usually elected to speak on behalf of the couple. I would have loved to see more of each of them speaking for themselves. There was so much conflict going on between the couples, Roman and Ashmal especially. And I feel like if they had each been given the chance to like say their piece about like how they felt about the throuple like individually, rather than like, oh, we've, privately talked about this and now we're going to make the decision that we've made as a team. I feel like that would have been much more interesting. Similarly, Lauren and Dylan. Lauren was clearly connecting with Becca much more than Dylan was. I would have loved to see her talk a little bit more about that and how Dylan felt about that. And maybe some truths would come out that would be somewhat uncomfortable and lead to drama, and that would also be entertaining. Like, instead, we got a lot of these couples having already made a decision as a team and then making their choice, right? And then the unicorns would kind of be blindsided by that. It feels very different from other dating shows where one person's just like, I thought about it and this is my decision, and the other individual's like, I thought about it and this is my decision. Like, no, this is 2 against 1. Like, 2 people have discussed and, they're in on something, together as a team. And yeah, like, it feels very much, skewed. So I feel like, if the goal is to create like an equal relationship and like a throuple and, whatever, like more individualism could have been shown on the show, especially when the whole point was like, yeah, like these couples were opening up and having like a difficult, vulnerable experience, Put them in challenging situations then. Don't baby them into this. Like in the final ceremony when they talk about commitment and shit. Like, it would have been so interesting if, like, instead of, like, single on this platform, couple on this platform, they walk towards each other, meet in the middle. If it had been a triangle, Like, how do all of them feel about committing to this throuple? Like, as a 3, like, not like, 2 plus 1. I feel like that would have been much more interesting. Like, I would have loved to see the 3 people being separated from each other, like, the night before the decision, rather than, the unicorns just going away and the couples being like, oh, I hope she commits to us. Like, it's just a broken format. Separate people more. That's kind of just what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. Separate people more. I promise it will be more potential for drama and it's more realistic. Everyone wins. Look, at the end of the day, Couple to Throuple is a messy reality show. And I'm glad that polyamorous people finally have their own messy reality show to hate watch. I did find it entertaining, alright? Like, I did watch all of it. I was enthralled and, invested, right? But I feel like there could have been so much more potential for drama that was not explored. Because, yeah, like, the realities of polyamory are actually potentially full of drama. And that's interesting. So, yeah, overall, encourage more individualism and separate dating. Have the couples be in more uncomfortable situations, separated from each other and connecting, individually to the third person. Give the singles more autonomy and, their own spaces to retreat to so that, they're not feeling pressured to kind of stick to the couples that they're with and cling on to them for dear life. Encourage the couples to explore taking accountability and sitting with uncomfortable emotions and having hard conversations and growing. There wasn't enough of that going on. And finally, be clear with everyone involved what the fuck they're actually in there for. Is it sex? Is it romance? Is it like a good fun time in the Bahamas? Is it like a long-term serious relationship? How experienced are you and how much of a risk are you willing to take? How much are you actually realistically willing to grow? How are you going to accommodate and welcome this person in without seeing them as a threat to your relationship? How are you going to make accommodations for them to make room? All of these questions are questions I'd wish they'd explored because it makes for much better television and also more realistic representation. But it's a start, and if there is a second season, I look forward to seeing what they do next.